Welcome to In Search of the Crystal Skull, an epic adventure into the world of mediocrity. My name is Aaron.
My name is Patricia.
And today we're talking about a pretty interesting, more European-style movie, I guess, which I think is probably far more up my street probably than it is up yours.
Exactly. So today we're going to be talking about a collaboration between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Hungary, with the probably an adaptation that only people who grew up in the 90s will probably remember. Or maybe for those who actually read the original novel, which came out around the late 1870s. In fact, this is the oldest book based off of an adaptation that we're talking about in this retrospective, because it was written in 1872 by George MacDonald, who actually became a major influence for a lot of fantasy writers. He was the influence for J.M. Barrie, who you may know as the writer of Peter Pan. He was the influence for J.R.R. Tolkien. He was the influence for Peter J. Beagle, who we talked about with The Last Unicorn, and also for another well-known fantasy writer who we'll talk about next week to conclude In Search of the Crystal Skull.
Mm-hmm. So, this movie is The Princess and the Goblin, and I think, this was at the very beginning of the 90s, so this was 1991, pretty much, and so, I mean, we're talking about that era was kind of like, The Rescue was Down Under, so, like, that was kind of like, a prototype, I guess, for the Renaissance era movies that were coming up.
Yeah, so I guess we need to bring this up. So, I would say, like, the 90s, I mean, other than maybe like a handful of books, fantasy was not really that common. Yeah. I would say that, when it came to like for kids who were like really into kind of like book series or TV shows, it was like superheroes, it was like Goosebumps and various other things. I don't think I really knew a lot of people who were like into fantasy stuff.
Well, I mean, like, we'll keep this in mind, like, you could argue that the Renaissance era movies were fantasy. Like, there was Aladdin who, like, was about a magic lamp. You had Beauty and the Beast was like, a guy who turned into a beast. And,
I mean, sure. We're talking about like, I guess we're talking about like the specific fantasies in which you have like, swords and magic and all that kind of stuff. But I guess this is a different type of fantasy that we'll be talking about throughout this retrospective, where it's about goblins this time. And we did talk about goblins with The Hobbit, but now we're talking about all types of goblins specifically. We're not talking about like elves or dwarves or anything like that. So it's specifically goblins. And once again, very similar to The Hobbit, goblins are the bad guys.
Yeah, and so, but mind you, like, the thing with the Princess and the Goblin, like, at least the bad guys are played by very fun characters. So,
that is very true, as opposed to, like, being evil, grrr.
Yeah, like, but, in a way that's, I think this was the style of, like, because in the Dreamstone, like, it was the people who played the Orkneys, like, they were played up as, like, they were comedians playing the bad guys in that, like, so, like, it was the style at the time for, like, comedic characters to play villains, because, they liked fun bad guys at the time, like, keep this in mind, like, this was in the same era that, we were introduced, like, the Dr. Robotnik, like, that was, like,
same year, by the way.
Very, very hilarious, yeah, so I think, looking at this, as an overall, it is your typical fantasy movie. Like, here's a cute princess, she's got this cute kitty, and, like, she's going through the forest, and, oh my god, she's run into, like, all sorts of horrible creatures, and she's scared of the dark and everything like that. And here comes the heroic kind of, like, prince character, or the boy character,
yeah, well, he's not a prince. He's actually a boy who just so happens to work in the mine.
What I mean.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, so, like, he sings a song about, scaring everything away, and like then basically finds the princess and teaches her how to basically to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because like throughout this retrospective we've been covering two movies that has been covered with songs, but in this one there's only just one.
Yeah, but mind you, there is one thing convention that it does break. Like, in regards to like a princess movie, like he would find like a prince who comes from another kingdom, and like they were trying like each other and things like that, that were basically the princess. It's not like rushed right into it like The Last Unicorn was, like it looks like based on kind of story, in regards to these type of storytellings. But I mean, like it wouldn't be later on until Aladdin where you had like a commoner, if you will, who meets up with like a royal princess.
Wow, you're actually right. It does kind of like feel like Aladdin now that I think about it.
Yeah, it has that aspect of it. But when the like Disney movies, like you would have like Sleeping Beauty, obviously, like it's a princess who's like hidden away, but she does come from like a family, a royal family, and then you have a prince who also comes from another royal family who goes try and find her and things like that. that. So like you have those that was kind of like how it was kind of like I'm not saying elitist, but it's kind of like you had like princes and princesses in kingdoms who basically would meet and have adventures, and that would be that.
Yeah.
This is different from that. So the boy in this story is the son of miners, and so he is basically going to be probably mining in the trade.
Yeah, his name is Curdie.
Curdie, yeah. So he meets up with this princess when he scares like all the away,
Princess Irene.
Irene, yeah. Irene's an interesting name.
It is a very interesting name. Even though that, according to what I've heard in like Welsh and Hungarian pronunciations, that is the actual pronunciation of the name as opposed to just Irene. Mm-hmm. So I just thought that was actually pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. So
come on, Irene.
Yeah, it's supposed to like come on, Irene. Mm-hmm. Oh, it doesn't have the same ring.
Yeah,
anyway, so so I guess we need to talk about the production company because this time it's not Rankin Bass. So it was produced by 3 different animation studios. So Pannonia Film Studio, which is in Hungary, Sianel for Cymru, which is in the United
Cymru. Yeah.
Okay, you deal with the UK stuff.
Okay. So, Sianel for Cymru, which is a Welsh, So, for those of you who don't know what that's like, it's basically S4C. So, S4C is like the Welsh version of Channel 4 in the UK.
And we did talk about Channel 4 before because that was where Father Ted was produced.
Exactly, yeah. And NHK is also
that is a very well-known Japanese television
It's
company.
the national broadcaster.
Exactly, yeah.
So, there are some pretty heavy hitters in this, and S4C, if you wonder why this movie is quite quirky and quite weird in a sense, Channel 4 is sort of like a station that likes to take risks with things. So that's the reason we got things like Father Ted. That's the reason we got things like Countdown and things like that. It's sort of more experimental kind of like ways of doing television production. And so that's the reason why if you look at The Princess and the Goblin, you wonder why he has like these weird quirks. That's probably where it gets it from.
So S4C is very similar to that.
S4C is like it's the Welsh version of Channel 4.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Okay, and so I am familiar with the director, Josef Gemis, who also directed another movie that one of my friends, Taylor, aka Y-Boy from Toongrin, reviewed, which is Willie the Sparrow. So if you're interested in checking out his review of it, then you can go to Toongrin to check it out. So yeah, I am familiar with his name because he also directed a few other Hungarian animated films. So it's actually funny, the release of this was 1994 in the United States, and this was when it was peak Disney. This was when the Disney Renaissance was huge, and there were a lot of imitators of Disney films that try to like cash in and try to make a quick buck. But here's the thing is that a lot of critics hated this movie when it first came out because they thought it was just a Disney ripoff, when in reality this movie came out when the Disney Renaissance era was just starting.
Yeah, it did not have a fair upbringing, I think we can definitely all say. And it's kind of sad really because in overall this movie actually lost a lot of money.
This is probably out of all the movies that we're talking about, this is probably the biggest bomb out of all of them.
You look in hindsight, this probably should have been a TV movie.
It should have been a TV movie. I get it that they were trying to say, hey, let's see if we can just release this in theaters and maybe people will think it's a Disney film, kind of like in The Last Unicorn, when guess what, it's not.
Yeah, and also I really hate that this is also because this movie has Rick Mayall in it, and I'm sure everyone's going to be dreading because obviously a lot of people don't like Drop Dead Fred.
That movie was just
movie was awful, but here's the thing. I want to come in defense of Rick Mayall. He is funny. He was in The Young Ones. He was in Bottom. He was in he also did a lot of theater productions as well, where he made a lot of people laugh. He's good in live environments, but movies not so much. I think we can definitely say.
We were actually talking about this when we were watching the movie. It's like, I guess maybe they thought that, hey, this British comedian is funny. Let's see if we can be able to take him out of television and put him into movies. It worked with John Cleese. It worked with Rowan Atkinson. So I guess, some people, it just doesn't work that way.
Exactly. So, which is really sad, really, because, obviously Rick Mayall was like Father Ted. He was a character who was taken away from us too soon. And,
right. Very similar to the actor of Father Ted.
He died of a heart
attack. Heart attack. Yeah.
So, it's just, I'm just, he's one of those, what could have been, situations, really, with Rick.
Yeah, every time that we were, looking into this movie, you were like, I've known of this person before, and then you were looking up the person who played as Irene's, maid, maid, and then you were like, oh, that's Mary Sugden, and I know her from Are You Being Served and Grace and Favor and all that stuff. And I'm like, huh? What is that?
Yeah, like this movie is insanely British. I mean, like you've got Sydney, Joss Odland, who is in the movie, and he's obviously from London, and then you've got Claire Bloom, who herself is from Finchley, Middlesex, and you've got Roy Kinner, who I think is also from Wigan. He's a northerner.
Yeah, this was his last movie, by the way.
Yeah, before he passed away. Yeah, exactly. And so then you got Peggy Mounts, and you got Victor Spinetti, and you got Molly Sugden, and Molly Sugden, hilarious. But in Are You Being Served? And it had a really nice British charm to it. And but I know there's a lot of people like say, well, don't British people usually play villains in these movies, and it's kind of like this is no exception because pretty much in regards to this, and I think looking at this movie, and I mean, obviously, it gets kind of like towards the end. I think you can say that it's not. I mean, it does get kind of like not as interesting. I think
it was building up to something really interesting. I mean, we have Princess Irene, who knows absolutely nothing about the goblins until Curdie explains to her, oh, everybody knows about it except for people who live in the castle. And then we finally get to have Irene meet up with her great-grandmother, who's also named Irene, and she's magical and all that kind of stuff. And she has a thread, and she gives it to her saying, follow the thread and it'll lead you to safety, and you will never be harmed, and I'll always be with you. Kind of like a fairy godmother. And then you have the king, who just so happens to come back after traveling for who knows how long, and then
doing what, who knows what.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
Well.
Who knows what. And then Irene says, there's a boy, and he tells me about this goblin. And instead of just like not believing her, he believes her right away.
Which, by the way, like is pretty much these tropes. Like he's like, father, I've seen X and it's doing Y, and it's kind of like, oh, you kids with your imaginations. It's like, and then eventually at the end of the movie, it's proven wrong.
Yeah, I'm glad they got rid of that pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So, mind you, the fact that he was willing to like believe her right off the bat, I thought that was building up to something. Like
I thought so too.
The king was a goblin this entire time. I don't know.
Or maybe the king. Here's the thing. That's a thing that we need to talk about, is that the goblins want to be able to kidnap Princess Irene so that she can marry the prince, and that the goblins would go up and basically take over the surface, because apparently, according to what the prince said, Princess Froglip, which is an interesting name. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Princess Froglip was explaining to his mother, saying like, oh, I'm going to marry the princess, and I'm going to be able to take over the sun people, and we will be reigning once again, because apparently there was a backstory about like hundreds of years ago that they were living in the surface, and then the humans dragged them down into the ground and banished them, and now they want to be able to get revenge. And so that's why Prince Froglip wants to kidnap the princess so that they can be able to take over the humans, rule the surface, and basically just have everything.
Yeah, like I thought, once again, it's one of those movies where humans do terrible things and then consequences happen decades later.
Exactly. Yeah. Or in this case, centuries later.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're going up to that theory.
When you really think about it, fantasy movies really hate humans when you really think about it, because they seem to be the ones who cause all the chaos and then have to kind of like fix things at the end.
I mean, I guess the only time in which that were to be not the case. I mean, even with like in The Hobbit with the three armies, I mean, they were actually able to help out the dwarves until of course you had the fight with the red army, the three armies, and then eventually they were like, nah, let's just not fight because we have the goblins to fight. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, for some reason humans are always the bad guys in this.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I guess we can look at, so the overall story is that, you have this princess, and by the way, she has this cute kitten that, I think was there to sell the toys, no doubt. And, then, so, she also interacts with, who is, the ghost of her great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, or something like that. Something like that, yeah. So basically, this is, the fairy godmother, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it is the fairy godmother in this. So basically, whenever she's in trouble, she goes up into the attic, and she looks for her spinning thread, thread, which kind of looks like the spinning needle from Sleeping Beauty. And then she says, "Great grandmother, I need your help. I don't know how to fight against the goblins and Curdie and, you know, that kind of stuff." And then she said, "Follow the thread and it'll take you to where you need to go and it'll take you to safety and you'll never be harmed and blah, 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 blah."
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it does basically play into those tropes. But, I mean, the Curdie stuff was actually pretty interesting, where he was able to, like, you know, accidentally fall into the cave when he was helping his father work at the mines because, of course, child labor laws. And then we have, you know, him spying on the goblins and, you know, finding out about the plan that they're going to kidnap Irene so that they can force her to marry Prince Froglip so that they can eventually take over the surface. And so that's when he goes up and he warns his father, and, you know, that's when he tries to, you know, see if he can be able to approach the king. But then, you know, that's when, you know, he gets caught and he gets kidnapped.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think they had to make the kid, like, have some kind of idea of, like, you know, mining in the you know, in the quarry and things like that, because, like, if he didn't do that, like, how on earth would he survive in the tunnels?
Exactly.
So, yeah. So I think him being, like, you know, like, I guess you could say an apprentice miner, I guess you could say, I think that kind of, like, you know, was there to, you know, make it plausible that, you know, he could survive down there.
And also we saw from the beginning of the movie that he's able to defend himself from the goblins because, you know, obviously he would have seen them while he was working in the mines, and when he was walking around in the forest at night and he was singing his song, he was able to ward off the pets and ward off the goblins by singing or stomping on their feet, which is their main weakness.
Yeah, which is interesting because, well, not only does the kid know about it, I mean, his father knows about them too.
Yes.
Which, you know, I think he's like the head guy of, like, the mine.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. Like, you know, if you know these things, I mean, like, wouldn't you be asking for, like, you know, extra, like, security, like, around the place in case you do come across against them?
I mean, remember that.
I mean, this isn't a SWAT cat situation where, you know, like, you remember that episode when they were, like, pumping all that, you know, pollutants into there, and yeah, like, and it was eating, like, you know, miners, like, kind of like that. Like, you know, you would have thought that, you know, if they had pre-warning, like, you know, they would be asking, you know, with the enforcers to kind of, like, you know, have a gun point to, like, every dark corner of every mine.
Well,
but,
I guess they would have if the castle actually knew about it.
Exactly, yeah. So, but the thing is, the miners knew about it. So you would have thought they would have told the kingdom.
Exactly. I mean, why didn't they tell this sooner? I mean, how long have they known about this?
Yeah, which makes me think, like, you know, if they made it where, I think it would. This is the thing where it feels kind of weird that the king kind of believes the daughter right away about the goblins, because, like, it would have probably made more sense in story where it's kind of like everyone in the castle is kind of like oblivious to the goblins, and, like, they're not really not too aware of them. They're aware of them, like, you know, like, oh, these are just, like, child tales that we tell to our kids at bedtime, you know, like, you know, passed on stories that were passed on centuries ago, but not realizing they were actually real.
Yeah.
And then, like, you know, there was, like, a massive, like, difference between, you know, the people, like, the peasants and the people, like, who are in, like, you know, the commoners, like, who lived outside the castle walls, and, like, you know, probably would have come, you know, who see these things all the time, and but then they don't interact all that many times with the people inside the castle. So obviously the castle, like, are oblivious to basically what's going on outside, and, like, you know, they live in, like, this other world. I thought that would have been excellent commentary.
That would have been excellent commentary. It kind of would have been like a child version of the Mask of the Red Death, in which when you have a plague that's you know, going all over the land and everybody is dying, but the prince decides that he's going to throw this lavish party and he's going to invite all the royalty so that they can be able to celebrate everything and be oblivious to the fact that there's a plague going on killing everybody.
Yeah. Kind of like now. Oh boy!
Oh jeez! You hit it in the nail. You hit it. Oh my gosh!
Yeah, just this. How can you ignore this?
I guess that's true.
As of this podcast, but so I mean, the story in itself, I think, has. I mean, it pretty much plays as a typical fantasy story, but at the same time, it has problems.
It does.
Yeah, like there's things that I felt like they should have really added in to kind of like have more dynamic. I think, but it kind of feels like, you know, the king just immediately believes the daughter, and, like, you know, oh hey, it's plausible that, you know, the princess, who's probably can't even, like, you know, looks like she can't even survive outside the castle walls, let alone, like, down in the tunnels.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's such an awful cliche. It's like the princess cannot be able to defend herself. Oh no, but I get it because she's been in the castle all her life, and also she's a child. I get it, but still, I'm just glad that this trope is going away.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be until until the later 90s that they decided, oh hey, you know, girl characters can have some spunk too.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, even the Disney princesses were able to do that. You know, we had Ariel, we had Belle, we had Jasmine, we had Pocahontas. I mean, they were able to show off that, hey, they don't need need no man to protect them. They can be able to do it by their own selves.
Exactly, yeah. So unfortunately, the Princess and the Goblin, unfortunately, is sort of kind of like, is a product of its time.
I mean, you have to remember that this is based off of a story that came out in the 1870s. So,
exactly.
Yeah. I guess that it, kind of like a Roald Dahl adaptation, it's like it needed tweaking to be more updated because the stuff is pretty dated.
I think the one thing I will defend for Princess Irene is that her arc with her grandmother, which is like, because, at one point the grandmother stops appearing and like, they go, Curdie's just kind of like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, this kind of reminds me of like in The Hobbit, it's like Gandalf just comes and goes whenever he wants and it's up to Bilbo to do it. But I can argue that it's needed because, Bilbo is able to build himself to being a stronger and more braver leader.
Do you think that was where Gandalf was the entire time? Like, he had a date with the grandmother and that's like the grandmother couldn't turn up.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Gandalf was dating a ghost because logic.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Like we managed to tie these two movies together. Like,
why not?
There's your crossover fan fiction for you. Right. So anyway, getting back to this movie. So the music. I mean, I can't remember one song from this movie.
I mean, other than the one song that they play over and over and
again.
over.
Yeah, like the one about scaring away the
that
monsters.
one. I mean, everything else. I mean, like the soundtrack is forgettable, and yeah, I mean, it's the last two movies. I mean, at least they had pretty decent music. I mean, even though that we know in The Hobbit we were saying that it plays over and over and over and over again,
yeah.
But we were saying it needed to happen because that's how they were able to tell parts of the story when the whole thing had to be rushed for over like an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. So, and then The Last Unicorn. I mean, I would say that yeah, the soundtrack is also pretty good, but then there were some moments that were kind of problematic. But yeah, like The Princess and the Goblin. Other than that one song, I can't remember anything.
Yeah, it is, unfortunately, it's a bunch of, by the way, NHK is not a production company to be, they make all sorts of great documentaries and they make all sorts of great programming for
one of my favorite
documentaries
Japan. That they released recently was the 5-part retrospective of Hayao Miyazaki.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a great one. If you want to see like all the work that he had to do to make his products as perfect as possible.
Yeah, which is like, when you really think about it, NHK, 4SC, and and also this other production. I mean, I'm not really too familiar with the other production studio, but 2 out of the 3, I would have thought they would have produced so much better.
I agree, but maybe it was due to like, I don't know, budget or maybe time constraint.
Or maybe it might be just the fact that Disney was back on the bounce.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that because it just so happened to come out around 1991, I think that they had realized, hey, Disney is making a major comeback. They're adapting these classic stories based off of fantasy and all this kind of stuff, and fairy tales are becoming really popular again. Let's just see if we can ride on the Disney wagon.
Yeah, well, there was another side of it too. Like, a lot of people at these production companies were coming in knowing that, keep in mind, like, Disney was still in the doldrums, come the 80s. Like,
yes,
they were. And so I think a lot of animated companies sort of smelt the blood in the water. And also, this was the time when Don Bluth also split their scene too. So, like, maybe there was a thought, like, oh, hey, well, like, if all these independent animations can, like, somewhat make it, and so maybe we should have a go at it too. And also, Disney's not going to be doing anything, remarkably, effective anytime soon.
Yeah.
So they took this gamble. Unfortunately, they hit 0-0, and then they basically lost at Vegas. So Disney basically started dominating pretty much the 90s from there on end.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, any other company that tried to do it, like Warner Brothers or Turner or anything of the sort, they couldn't stand a chance.
Yeah, and good grief, like, all the war stories that probably Don Bluth can probably tell about.
Oh my God, yeah, for sure. Like the fact that he went bankrupt several times, and the fact that his animation studio was shut down the same year that Toy Story came out in. Oof.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, it is another movie sort of like, oh, hey, is this a Disney movie? It's like, it's one of those, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is one of those. People have been saying, is it up on Disney Plus? And I'm like, no, it's not.
Yeah. So, anyone who... that's the fun thing about some of these things that we cover. Like, it's like, oh, hey, this kind of looks Disney-esque, can we actually see it on Disney Plus or something like that? It's like, nope.
No, you cannot.
It's either Amazon Prime or it's... that's a funny thing. Like, Amazon actually is picking up a lot of more of these these obscure animated movies.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, like it's if they make money out of it, then great. But it's kind of weird that they would kind of like pick up on things that didn't do very well at the box office and had modest success on VHS and probably modest success on DVD.
Yeah, I mean, I actually owned this movie in VHS when I was a kid because my dad had like he knew a guy who was able to get me a lot of VHS tapes, some of them bootleg and some of them like authentic, and we were able to like watch a lot of these movies when we had the time. And I think that this might have been like a legit tape that I owned. I don't think it was a bootleg, but I did see it several times. And there was another one that I did see that was based off of a classic fairy tale that has since been pretty obscure, but it's not very good, which was Happily Ever After, which was the Filmation version of the classic Snow White of the Seven Dwarfs. And that was the last movie that they released until Filmation basically just shut down their company due to bankruptcy. So unfortunately, we will not be covering it in Crystal Skull because it is pretty low on Rotten Tomatoes.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, let's finish off with The Princess and the Goblin, and let's give it a score.
All right.
So, I mean, here's the thing about this. Like, can we really say that it's done anything overly offensive?
No, it has not.
Yeah, it's not like what The Last Unicorn is, with like some of the crazy stuff that we saw in that movie. Like,
made absolutely no sense.
At the same time, like it plays it very, very safe.
It does, and it actually builds up to something that would have been interesting, and then it just like falls into its tropes at the end, and then it just becomes pretty generic.
Yeah, I would say 6.5.
Yeah, I would say 6.5 as well, because there's some good things here. I mean, it builds up to something really interesting, and the acting is pretty good.
Yeah.
And the animation is all right. So, yeah, that's
one thing actually we should have mentioned is that the voice acting is okay, like and also like it has a nice British charm to it, which actually comes this movie talks to me, in that. But unfortunately, I just think that it wouldn't have hurt to bring in the script writers again and say, let's just have one last revision and let's just clear a couple of things up before we hit animatics.
Yeah, and I'm sure if this movie would have been successful, I'm sure we would have gotten a sequel, because there is actually a sequel to the book, The Princess and Curdie, where it takes place about 2 years after the ending, and then they go off on another adventure. I'm sure
but spend another $10 million on a $2 million box office. No sane person would probably want to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure if this movie would have been a bigger hit, it would have happened immediately.
Yeah. Here's something interesting about this. Like, maybe it's a bit kind of weird to kind of talk about it maybe in this podcast, but you notice that, where there's all these, these animations that people are doing, and how far off now do you think? Do you think in 10 years' time, do you think they will do the Princess and Curdie, but it won't be done by, a professional studio. It'll be basically just done by a bunch of hobbyists, in their bedrooms, and, they put this together because the technology is there to do it.
They'll have to definitely get new voice actors for sure.
Yeah, but you can get voice actors off Fiverr. Are we getting to that point now where we see all how talented some animation? And by the way, not everybody who studies animation is gonna make it into the big time.
That's
pretty
true.
much. So is it going to be the fact that we have such a talent overload and such a high burn in the animation industry that we might see these leaking out onto things like we are seeing it actually already on YouTube and things like that. Has Been Hotel, all stuff like that.
Exactly. We have seen a rise in internet animation. Like you said, Has Been Hotel, there's Ruby, there's Homestar Runner, there's Ed's World, there's Tome. There's a lot of other animation out there that is available on the internet for people to watch.
Yeah, but I wonder when we are going to get the cinematic experience, but it's not done by some major motion picture company. It's done by a bunch of hobbyists who basically sat in their bedrooms and basically just animated and wrote stories and things like that.
That would be really interesting, considering that animation takes a lot of time, even for an animated series. For a movie, that will take even longer.
Well, I probably imagine it'll take 20 years. Probably do, give or take.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But I think that they'll probably maybe start it off with maybe doing a revised version of Princess and the Goblin, because it's like you said before, the story could definitely use a lot of revising and tweaking, because there's some things in there that leave a lot to be desired, and I'm sure that they can be able to capture the spirit of it, but at the same time make it a little bit more authentic to what the source material was. So I think that down the line, once again, very similar to The Hobbit and very similar to The Last Unicorn, it is more or less a cult fan favorite. Not a lot of people know about this. Not a lot of people grew up with it, unless, of course, you did own it on VHS. So,
or you happen to come across it on free TV, at some obscure time in the morning.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that maybe, what you were saying before about like something being done by hobbyists would probably be done with that, but I'm not sure about for this adaptation.
We'll see. All right then. So we are going to be going up to our final movie of Fantasy Month, and that is going to be Narnia. And that is a movie that's on Disney Plus.
Yeah, we were joking all this time about can you see this on Disney Plus? No. Can you see that on Disney Plus? No. But now we're finally going to go into the 2000s, which is where fantasy really started getting into the mainstream popularity, and we're going to conclude it with The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Well, until then, take care, everybody, and we will see you for that episode next week.
Bye-bye, everyone.